One of the innovations that the Institutional Grammar 2.0 introduced was different levels of expressiveness. The levels of expressiveness grew out of recognition that researchers and practitioners needed to study institutional statements at varying levels of detail, depending on the kind of information required for their analysis of an institution. The IG 2.0 has three levels of expressiveness: IG Core, IG Extended, and IG Logico. The following diagram illustrates the relationship among the three levels of expressiveness, as well as what each level focuses on. IG Core offers the most basic, high-level analysis of institutional statements, focusing on identifying the different syntactic components that make up regulative and constitutive statements. The next level, IG Extended, offers a deeper analysis of select components, as well as a greater focus on linkages between and embedded within syntactic components. Finally, IG Logico offers the deepest level of analysis. Here the focus shifts away from identifying components and their linkages to looking at semantics. In other words, at the meanings behind the specific words or phrases used in institutional statements. Each level of expressiveness has a set of associated features. We'll discuss each feature briefly in this video, and then go into greater detail in later installments. We've covered many IG Core concepts in earlier videos, but we'll review them here quickly. The IG 2.0 classifies institutional statements as either regulative or constitutive statements. Regulative statements regulate the actions of actors, while constitutive statements define features of systems. Each statement type has its own set of syntactic components. Regulative statement components include attributes, aim, context, object, deontic, and or else, while constitutive statement components are the constituted entity, constitutive function, context, constituting property, modal, and or else. The IG 2.0 also recognizes the existence of nested institutional statements, which is when an institutional statement contains a clause, usually an or else, that can function as its own institutional statement. Institutional statements can be nested horizontally or vertically. Horizontal nesting captures the presence of multiple components in a statement that are logically linked, while vertical nesting is when two or more institutional statements are linked by their consequential relationship. One statement spells out a regulative or constitutive action, and the other identifies a consequence that results from the other statement not being carried out as intended. IG Core also offers refinements to the institutional statement typology originally introduced by Crawford and Ostrom. Crawford and Ostrom classified institutional statements as rules, norms, and shared strategies, depending on the presence or lack thereof of certain syntactic components in an institutional statement. This table shows Crawford and Ostrom's original classification. The IG 2.0 keeps the same norms, rules, strategies distinction, but moves away from defining them solely based on what syntactic components are or aren't present, and instead embraces a taxonomy rooted in semantics, as illustrated on this table. IG Extended goes beyond IG Core to allow for deep parsing of institutional statements, and introduces a few new concepts to do so. Alongside horizontal and vertical nesting, IG Extended adds component-level nesting. Component-level nesting is when an individual syntactic component is replaced with either an institutional statement or an institutional state. Unlike institutional statements, institutional states don't perform any regulative or constitutive functions. Instead, an institutional state describes a specific state of affairs, for instance, an observed behavior or environmental conditions, and often acts to condition an institutional statement in some way. IG Extended also introduces the object property hierarchy. This describes the relationship between an object and the properties it possesses. In short, the object property hierarchy states that an object can have one or more properties. Those properties can be either simple or complex. Properties can themselves be objects and thus possess their own properties. And objects and their properties can have different kinds of relationships. For example, one property might qualify or condition another property. Staying on properties for a moment, the IG Extended offers a property typology that allows us to classify properties along different categories to capture additional institutional information. Here's what that typology looks like. At a general level, properties can be either qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative properties, in turn, can be further classified as simple or complex. In addition to the object, IG Extended also introduces a context taxonomy to further characterize how institutional statements are embedded within specific settings or environments. The context component can be sorted into 4 categories: substantive, procedural, aspirational, and situational. Substantive context gives information about the wider institutional setting, such as time and place. Procedural context offers information about any procedures that are involved. For instance, if there's an order in which certain tasks need to be done, or if there's a means by which something may or must be carried out. Aspirational context conveys motivations, objectives, and desires, the reason behind an action or an entity, or the effect something is intended to have. Finally, situational context tells us about states of affairs, as well as specific changes or transitions that an institutional statement is linked to. For example, if there's a certain state to be achieved, or if an event causes something to happen. Finally, recognizing that institutional statements aren't always purely regulative or constitutive, IG Extended introduces the concept of hybrid and polymorphic institutional statements. Hybrid institutional statements are ones that contain both regulative and constitutive elements. Polymorphic institutional statements, meanwhile, are statements that can be read in both regulative and constitutive terms. Having reviewed the basics of IG Core and IG Extended, we now turn to IG Logico. As mentioned previously, IG Logico shifts focus from the structure of institutional statements to their semantics and seeks to capture the meaning behind components. IG Logico is additionally interested in linkages not just among components, as IG Extended was, but across institutional statements as well. IG Logico introduces semantic annotations intended to extract deeper levels of meaning than are available through the kind of structural analysis done in IG Core or IG Extended. IG Logico introduces 4 kinds of taxonomies: animacy taxonomy, metatype taxonomy, role taxonomy, and the institutional functions taxonomy. The animacy taxonomy specifies whether an entity referenced in a syntactic component is animate, like a person, or inanimate, like a document or a concept. It allows for distinguishing between relationships involving animate actors and those involving actors and inanimate objects or an idea. The metatype taxonomy allows us to identify whether an entity is something concrete, for example, a grant program, or abstract, for example, a belief or value. In this way, we can distinguish between institutional statements dealing with tangible, observable matters versus statements rooted mainly in mental concepts. The role taxonomy captures the role that an entity occupies within an institutional statement. Under the role taxonomy, entities can be classified according to their role, as well as the effect caused by an action referenced in that statement. There are 3 role characterizations: originator, causer, agent, recipient, and possessor. There are also 3 effect characterizations: experiencer, advantaged, and disadvantaged. Finally, there's the institutional functions taxonomy. The taxonomies we just discussed, as well as earlier ones like the context taxonomy and IG Extended, focus on capturing information about specific entities within an institutional statement. The institutional functions taxonomy, on the other hand, allows us to classify activities or functions described in the statement. There are 2 institutional function taxonomies corresponding to the 2 institutional statement types: a regulative functions taxonomy and a constitutive functions taxonomy. The regulative functions taxonomy offers 4 ways to label the activity described in a regulative statement's aim: compliance action, an action reflecting compliance behavior; monitor, an action reflecting the institutional function of monitoring; enforce, an action reflecting enforcement acts; and enforcement response, an action reflecting responses to enforcement outcomes. The constitutive functions taxonomy provides categories for labeling the constitutive functions component of constitutive statements. Broadly, constitutive functions can be classified based on whether they pertain to entities or institutions. Constitutive functions can define entities, they can establish relationships between them, They can describe parts of an entity's life cycle, and they can be responsible for the conferral of status. Constitutive functions relating to institutions can also describe an institution's life cycle and relationships, in addition to its intent or purpose. Furthermore, the constitutive function can provide certain information about what the institution does. Along with annotating components along specific taxonomies, as we've just seen with the institutional functions taxonomy, IG Logical also allows for annotating statements as a whole. Vertical nesting annotations provide greater specificity as regards institutional statements that are vertically nested. An institutional statement that is vertically nested can be a monitored statement, a statement that tells someone or something what they may or must do, a consequential statement, a statement that indicates the consequences associated with the monitor statement, or a monitoring statement, a statement that signals oversight but does not specify enforcement. Institutional statements can also be annotated based on the kind of consequences that result from them. IG Logical calls these consequence annotations. Institutional statements can have social and institutional consequences, an economic or environmental impact, for instance, or configurational consequences, such as redefining some aspect of the institutional setting. Thus far, we've seen a few ways that institutional statements can be linked to one another, such as through vertical nesting. One that we haven't discussed thus far is what IG Logical calls statement references, which is when institutional statements invoke other institutions. This happens when an institutional statement includes mention of another policy text or some segment of it. Statement references can take two forms. First, statement references can be either internal, meaning that an institutional statement references other statements within the same source document, or external, meaning that a statement references statements from another source. References can also be implicit or explicit. The final aspect of IG Logical that we'll review here are statement transformation rules. Using IG Logical, we can study instances where the form of an institutional statement is changed, while its underlying meaning stays the same. There are three kinds of transformations. Component-level combination transformation involves breaking down an institutional statement with multiple linked components into two or more institutional statements, thereby making the linkages between components more explicit. Conditions consequence transformation involves reworking an activation condition into an or else to shift perspective from the monitor or enforcer to the regulated actor. Finally, in properties conditions transformations, the properties of an attribute are instead expressed as activation conditions. This has the effect of simplifying the attributes, while putting all information about an institutional statement's preconditions in the activation conditions. At this point, some of you watching probably feel like you've been hit with a lot of information in a short stretch of time. And no doubt there are concepts that we covered here that you want to explore in greater detail. Don't worry. In later videos, we'll spend more time with both IG Extended and IG Logical, and look at examples of the concepts introduced in this video. This video is intended to provide a general overview of the three levels of expressiveness in the IG 2.0, and the different kinds of analysis that each level allows. A final point regarding the levels of expressiveness. In your coding, you can pick and choose features corresponding to different levels to meet your research aims. For example, you could engage in IG core coding but include semantic labels to capture attribute roles if, for example, you are interested in the role of different environmental protection agency actors in carrying out fuel efficiency thresholds. So, consider mixing and matching features in the way that helps you best answer your research questions.